Have you ever heard a name that just stops you? Makes you think there's a whole story there, like a Detroit Red. Today, that's where we're going. We're doing a deep dive into the really formative early years of Malcolm X, specifically that time when he was known as Detroit Red.
Yeah, our mission here is to sort of unpack all those forces, societal, family, personal, that took Malcolm Little and shaped him into this street hustler figure, and crucially, how that incredibly tough period actually paved the way for his later transformation into, well, a revolutionary leader. We're leaning on some great sources today, Detroit Red's metamorphosis, from hustler to revolutionary, and also pulling a lot from the New York Public Library's online exhibition archive, specifically that section, Growing Up. Malcolm Little to Detroit Red from their Malcolm X Search for Truth exhibit. It's got timelines, details, even a quote from the autobiography itself. Okay, so let's get into this journey. To really understand it, we need to go right back to the start. Malcolm Little, born May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska.
Right? And what's fascinating, really striking right from the outset, is how deep those early influences ran. His parents, Earl and Louise Little, they met at a UNIA convention, that's Marcus Garvey's group, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So they were deeply committed to this international black worldview.
Which wasn't just a belief system, was it? It made them targets.
Absolute targets. White supremacists harassed them constantly. So young Malcolm is born into this reality of intense racial hostility. It wasn't abstract. It was right there.
And then the absolute tragedy with his father, Earl Little, killed in September 1931, officially run over by a streetcar in East Lansing, Michigan.
Officially, yes. But the black community there, they strongly suspected local racists were behind it. Think about that for a 6-year-old.
Yeah, the trauma. And it just compounded, didn't it? His father's violent death and then what happened to his mother, Louise.
It's devastating. After Earl's death, Louise Little just sinks into this desperate poverty. The kids are understandably acting out, difficult to handle. And then you have these racist social service authorities just hounding her relentlessly.
Leading to her being declared legally insane?
Exactly. Committed to a state mental hospital in Kalamazoo in January 1939. And she stayed there for 26 years.
Yeah.
Just gone from his life, essentially.
It's almost impossible to imagine that level of disruption for a kid. He ends up in a juvenile home, spring of 39, then foster homes in Lansing through 40 and 41. So much instability.
So much. Yet somehow, and this was remarkable, he and his siblings managed to stay close despite everything, despite the separation, despite his own behavior starting to, stray.
It makes you wonder how that early experience shaped him. Did it make him tougher? More independent?
I think it absolutely did. The sources suggest it forged this incredibly independent thinker. He had a strong personality, innate leadership qualities, even though, as you said, he kind of lost his way during those teenage years and into his early 20s. That resilience was being built, maybe unknowingly.
Okay, so here's where things really shift, right? The move towards becoming Detroit Red. 1940, his older sister Ella invites him to Boston.
Yes, and Boston was like stepping into another world for him.
The big city effect.
Totally. He was exhilarated. The relative freedom compared to Michigan. He ends up dropping out of school after 8th grade, living with Ella.
And Boston becomes this new playground, or maybe proving ground.
A bit of both, I think. He starts finding ways to push back, to express this resistance to white power that was probably simmering for years. By 41, he's only 16, but he gets a job working the trains, the New York to Boston route.
Which is his ticket to Harlem.
Exactly. Straight into the heart of the Black Mecca. He gets work at Small's Paradise, famous spot on 135th Street. And this is where the hustling really starts to take hold.
Right, so the name, Detroit Red. How did that actually come about? It's such a specific, evocative name.
It is, and the autobiography gives it to us straight. He says, basically, people, knowing I was from Michigan, would ask me what city. And since most people in New York hadn't heard of Lansing, he'd just say Detroit.
Simpler. And red, presumably, for his hair color.
That's the common understanding, yeah. His reddish hair. So Detroit Red, and he says it stuck.
And that name really defines that period, doesn't it? Roughly 43 to 44, when he gets deeper into the underworld.
Much deeper, both in Boston and Harlem. We're talking drug peddling, running numbers, the illegal lottery selling bootleg whiskey, petty crimes. He was fully immersed.
And the sources connect this directly back to those earlier experiences, don't they? That feeling of being boxed in by racism and lack of opportunity.
Absolutely. It wasn't just thrill-seeking, though maybe there was an element of that. It was fundamentally shaped by those racial and class inequalities. The system offered him so few legitimate paths.
So the street life became a way to survive, a way to carve out some kind of space.
I think so. A very dangerous space, but a space nonetheless. He was navigating it, trying to learn its rules, trying to, as one source puts it, master it. It was this harsh education to empower, survival, reading people.
But that kind of life, it rarely ends well, does it?
It eventually caught up with him. December 1945, he gets involved in a string of thefts back in Boston.
And by January 46,
Arrested. Charges of larceny, breaking and entering, firearms possession, the whole deal.
which led to the conviction.
Convicted and sentenced to up to 10 years in prison. Which sounds like the end of the story, or at least the end of that chapter.
And it wasn't.
Not at all. As the sources make really clear, that prison sentence, that rock bottom moment, that was actually the catalyst. The absolute turning point that set him on the path towards Islam, the Nation of Islam, and ultimately becoming the Malcolm X we remember.
So looking back at this whole period, what does it all tell us about understanding the man he became? We've traced this path from Malcolm Little through all that trauma and systemic pressure to Detroit Red, caught up in this, well, this desperate and dangerous hustle. It really shows the crucible, doesn't it? The fire that forged the beginnings of his later transformation.
It really does. And it leaves you with a pretty powerful question to think about, doesn't it? How does that kind of intense adversity, especially when it's tied up with systemic things like racism and class inequality, how does that shape a life? How does it push someone onto paths they might never have otherwise taken? What really stands out to you when you consider that specific journey, from Malcolm Little to Detroit Red?